Hello, this is Falterfire, and this is the second part of my new card review. So the last video covered generic cards and a couple character cards that were functionally new in version 5100. This video is covering the monster cards that are either some of them are new cards for new monsters, and a few of them are cards for monsters that already existed, but that have changed basically to be entirely different in their design. So let's get started. So starting with the replacements. First up, we have Arcane Aegis, which used to be called Cursed Shield. So Cursed Shield was a very bad card. It was 3 mana, you got 6 shield and applied 6 arcane to any enemy. You may recognize this as a decent amount of mana for not enough shield and not enough arcane to matter. The new version, Arcane Aegis, is actually a very good card. You apply 10, it's 4 mana for a skill, you apply 10 arcane to any enemy, and you gain 10 shield if this triggers an arcane detonation. So you're now spending 1 more mana, and you're losing the guarantee of the shield, but in exchange, you are getting enough arcane to trigger a detonation a lot of the time, and you're getting 10 shield, which is enough to actually block an entire turn of attack from like a Thornberry in Area 1 or a few other normal enemies. It'll be actually a decent amount of shield. And the upgrade is very, very good. This is a very good upgrade because 15 shield is a pretty substantial amount for a single card, and 15 arcane is enough to trigger an arcane detonation up to 3 times on the same enemy. Not in one go, but the first one is 10, the second one is 12, the third one is 14. So 15 is enough to trigger an arcane detonation. If you play it 3 times, you'll get 3 detonations, even if you don't have any relevant buffs or enemy debuffs that would affect that. The other point is that 15 is enough to break through tough or plated 1 or 2. Or even, like tough 2 or tough and plated 2 together. So that's very, very convenient. The other note on it is that if you are, I would generally not take Arcane Aegis if I was playing a deck that didn't have any ways to get Adept and that wasn't planning to apply Vulnerable to enemies. But there are a lot of decks that will have the ability to apply Vulnerable even if they aren't getting Adept. And if you're applying Vulnerable, now this is 13 Adept, which means that you can get it to trip twice. And having this as a card that you could run in your aggressive deck that is a source of damage that is also going to provide you with a decent amount of defense is quite a lot of flexibility and makes it a very useful card. I would absolutely take the first Arcane Aegis if I was playing Rowden or Salon or Paladin, all of whom are going to tend to want to have arcane applying cards anyway. But if you're not playing those, I would still consider taking this on Merle, or Drophus is probably the least likely to want it because she really wants to be taking hits to her health. But Anna's fine with it. Katon doesn't love it, but can get use out of it. But yeah, it's just a pretty versatile card. It goes from Cursed Shield, which was a card that you would only consider in very, very, very rare scenarios, to being a card that you will be actively looking for some decks, and at least consider most of the time it shows up, even if it ends up not being a card you take. Prismatic Shield is the new Shadowbone protection card. So Prismatic Shield is the same name. It didn't even change names, but it used to be 2 mana, gain 10 shield, and then Shock Barrier 2, Arcane Barrier 2, and Frost Barrier 2. Now it is 3 mana, gain 12 shield and Purity 1, reduce all of your statuses by 6. So the first note here is the access to purity has been massively reduced. So having this card as a way to get purity is very relevant. 12 shield is enough shield to be relevant. And although reducing all of your statuses tends not to be relevant unless you are self-applying status in Area 3, because there just aren't many fights that are going to be applying status to you, that can still be relevant, especially because there are several powerful cards like Mystic Ritual, which is the card draw card from Arcane Wisps, and then you may be running like a Phase Grace if you're in Merle, or you might be running Voltaic Surge if you're playing Paladin, or you might have a Shocking Focus. Anyway, there's a lot of cards that you might have that would give you a reason to want to be reducing your own status. Not enough to run a card that would only do that, but when it's just an added bonus on a card that is also giving you 12 shield and purity 1, very happy to see it. The other note is that this means protectors are now very high priority targets if you see Maw as your boss, because previously it was already a great target because Clear Focus, the other card that is dropped by the protectors, is gain 4 mana and then cleanse yourself once, which is very, very good. But the flip side of that was that Elemental Barrier was a lot worse because the barriers aren't that useful a lot of the time, and the 10 shield was good, but there's a lot of shield cards. So relative to Clear Focus, which Clear Focus is such a big help in a lot of Area 3 fights against the curse, getting Prismatic Shield instead felt like a bit of a whammy. Now, when you go into the Protector fight, regardless of which card it drops, you will have some way to help manage incoming debuffs. And that is worth quite a lot. So that's my notes on that. Prismatic Shield is very good. When you fight a Protector, you're probably taking whichever card it drops, unless you're playing just an incredibly aggressive deck that is so aggressive that it doesn't need any shield or purity. Or if you're offered like a keystone card for your deck that you just desperately need, you're taking Prismatic Shield if it's offered, you're taking Clear Focus if it's offered. Or you're rerolling Prismatic Shield because you specifically want Clear Focus. So yeah, very good cards. Speaking of very good cards, Pulverize. I don't even remember the exact text that Pulverize used to have. It was an expensive strike that was like, deal some amount of damage and you gain some amount of shield if the last card you played was a strike. That is no longer what it does. It is now 6 mana, or it is still 6 mana, but it is now deal 5x3 damage to the first enemy, and then you deal 5x3 additional damage if you're tough, and you gain 2 shield per rank of sturdy. So what this means is that this is now an amazing way for your defensive deck to pick up a single card and have a win condition that isn't waiting for the opponent to starve to death. This has the incredible advantage of being a way to both deal damage while still getting a bunch of shield. So you don't have to drop you are spending 6 mana on it, but it is covering both your defense and doing damage. It is a lot of hits, which means that if you don't have that many other damaging cards, this will still be able to tear through like a Drake or a Shadowflame Scout that has a bunch of evasion. This stacks very well with Powerful because it is so many hits, and the upgrade takes you to 5x4 on both halves of the hit and 3 shield per rank of sturdy, making it just a fantastic way to close out fights. Now, you do need some amount of support for it in order for it to work. If you aren't tough, it's 6 mana for a 5x4 damage is not the worst thing you could be doing, but it's not exactly great for having spent an upgrade on it. And even 5x8 damage, although it's a lot, is still, if this is your only damage card, you're going to have to play that a lot of times to finish out fights. But it is such a great card to shoot for when you're playing a defensive deck that I think is very much worth keeping in mind. So the next card is Elemental Conjunction, which is the Elemental Amalgam card. So Elemental Conjunction used to just had the same conditions, but it was just deal damage and then deal more damage for each of the extra conditions met. Now, it is a weird card. It is 4 mana, you deal 20 damage to any enemy if it's burning, and then you draw 4 if that enemy is frozen, and you gain 8 mana if that enemy is shocked. So before this update, the awkward thing with Elemental Conjunction was that you kind of had to be meeting multiple conditions in the same deck to want to have it at all, because otherwise you just weren't getting enough damage out to be worthwhile. And the whole package of hitting all 3 of the hits was going to be difficult for the average deck to meet, and not going to be so spectacular as to make you super happy if you did, given the amount of effort involved. But now it is very good if you expect to meet either of the frozen or the shocked conditions, I think. If you can expect enemies to be shocked, then this is straight up 4 mana gain. It is just straight up plus 4 mana. And which is very, very good. It is a spell, which means it will be affected by fatigue. That is relevant. But plus 4 mana is pretty good with no downsides. And if you're ever going to have enemies that are burning, then it will be, because if the enemy is shocked and burning, then that means you're getting 40 damage and plus 4 mana, which is a pretty good deal. So I would still tend to, if you are a freezing deck though, and this is just 4 mana draw 4, or upgrades in 5 mana draw 6, absolutely you take this and upgrade it if you're a frozen deck, even if you're not meeting any of the other conditions. With a shock deck, I think I would generally only want to have this, I would only highly prioritize this if I had at least some ways to freeze and some ways to burn. Even if you're not consistently hitting multiple conditions, as long as you're always hitting at least one, it's a pretty good card. And if that one is frozen, it's already a good card. And if you're hitting 2, it's still it becomes excellent. If you're going to be hitting 2 of the 3 conditions, it becomes a very good card that I would absolutely take. So I would keep this card in mind when you are getting offered earlier cards. I would be more inclined to go after Drakes to pick up a burning focus if I know that I'm on a shock deck and I'm potentially going to be fighting the Amalgam. And likewise, like if I'm a frozen deck, I'm more likely to go try and pick up burn to go with it, or a little bit of shock. Because, if this is draw 4 and gain 4 mana, that's just kind of absurd. Especially because you're going to upgrade, so it'll be draw 6 and gain 5 mana, which is, like I said, kind of absurd. So you need to be putting in work to make it work, but you will be rewarded if you are. So the next card is Convene with Shadows, which is the Watcher of the Swarm card. And it is another kind of summon. So it is summon 1 allied Shadow Burst. If you can't, give the first ally Unstable 15 and Taunt 1. So Unstable 15 means that when that ally dies, if that ally dies, it will deal 15 damage to all enemies. And Taunt 1 means that enemies that are only attacking one target or only applying debuffs to one target will be attacking your first ally instead. So Shadow Bursts, by default, I think it's 6 damage, and I should have this written down, but I don't. But I believe it is 6 damage and 6 Arcane, and then Allied Shadow Burst plus, because one of the other changes with this patch is that upgraded summon cards summon upgraded versions of the summon. I believe Allied Shadow Burst plus is like 8 Arcane and 8 damage, which normally I'm not a big fan of things that do 8 Arcane, but because this will do it every turn, it will pop explosions pretty regularly. I think this card is really, if we're being honest, more of a meme tier card than a real consideration. It is, especially as an Area 3 boss card, it's going to be fairly low impact a lot of the time. The Shadow Bursts, if you don't have any other summons, the Shadow Bursts are going to, summon support, Shadow Bursts are just not going to do that much for you. And even if you do, the fact that Shadow Burst doesn't really multi-hit is going to mean that putting your resources into the Shadow Burst instead of your turret or your Angry Spirit is usually going to not pay out well. But it's not a bad card. It's a fun card. I like that it exists. I enjoy playing with it. I just don't think in terms of... It is a card that I would take when I was already comfortable that my run was going to be a winning run, but not a card I would take with the expectation that it would be a major contributor for reasons besides the fun factor. So that is all of the new cards on old enemies. So let's get into the new cards on new enemies. Let's talk about the Bog Golem. So Bog Golem is a jerk. Bog Golem has 100 health and 100 shield and a permanent stack of Poisoned Blood 1, which means every time that it loses health, you're going to get a stack of poison, and so are all your summons. This is very miserable. This is not a good time. Bog Golem has a nasty habit of attacking for a lot of damage, applying a lot of poison, filling your deck with cards that are obnoxious to get rid of because they apply a bunch of poison and they make you weak, and just all around being generally rude. One of the fights that you can start Area 3 with is a Bog Golem and a Prowler, and that is just... there's another starting fight I want to say that is just 2 scouts, and the 2 scout fight is, or the 2 martial elemental fight is so much easier than the Bog Golem plus Prowler fight that it's not even funny. So surely the cards they drop are great, right? Yeah. So let's start with Hardened Toxins. It is 4 mana, you gain 1 shield for every rank of poison across all enemies, and you gain poison 10. And then Hardened Toxin Plus, you gain 1 shield for every rank, is still 1 shield for every rank of poison across all enemies, and you gain poison 5. So it's 1 mana cheaper, and you get less poison on yourself. So for this card to be good, you need to be gaining a lot of shield. If you're not going to be upgrading it, and you're in Area 3, so you've already gotten through 2/3 of your upgrade chances, you may or may not even get to, depending on when you fight the Bog Golem, if it's after the mid-boss, you may not even get a single upgrade chance after you take this this card. So we're going to look mainly at the unupgraded version. You get 1 shield for every rank of poison across all enemies, and you gain poison 10. So right off the bat, you need... So one of the things to keep in mind, Purity is harder to get your hands on now, which means that Purity is going to be... that spending Purity on this is going to be a bigger ask, and it means that you're less likely to be able to block with Purity. So we're going to assume that you are taking 10 damage when you play this. 10 damage this turn, and then if you don't win this turn, or if you don't win next turn, another 5 damage on the following turn. So with that in mind, for 4 mana in Area 3, how much shield do we need to offset 10 poison, to offset 15 damage? And the answer is obviously going to be at least 15, because if we gain exactly 15 shield, then we are trading shield now for no shield. We're basically stealing from our future selves. So we need at least 15 shield. But if we look at the other cards, let's look at, say, Void Shield, which has a mode. We're going to ignore Void Shield's other mode, but Void Shield is 4 mana, you gain 15 shield. So that is a generic card that you could just have in your card pool. And it's not a particularly spectacular card. It's not a bad card, but it's not amazing either. So you need at least 15. So for Hardened Toxins then to be worthwhile, you need it to get at least 15 more shield than the 15 damage taken from the poison. So you need to be getting 30 shield out of Hardened Toxin, which is to say, and you need to be getting that basically every time you draw it, because otherwise, unlike other shield cards where you can play, if you have a shield card that is that would give you 8 shield, but otherwise isn't going to do anything, Hardened Toxins can actively be a bad card to play if you don't have the poison out. So it is a risk to carry because it is a card that can be dead, and you need to have 30 poison on all. It is across all enemies, but that is still 30 poison in order for it to be at about on par with Void Shield, which is a solid but not exceptional generic card. So you have to be very dedicated to the poison strategy for that. And the second part of that is you have to be a poison deck. So you have to be a poison deck. You're not getting, the point that I'm trying to get to here is you are not getting value out of Hardened Toxins in anything other than a dedicated poison deck. And if you are a dedicated poison deck, you have to decide if you need it, because you beat a bog golem, which means you already had enough with a poison deck, and poison decks don't tend to be too fast, which means either your poison deck is fast enough to blitz down the bog golem, or your poison deck is resilient enough that it already is managing incoming damage well enough that it was worth fighting bog golem. Which means that for this card to be worthwhile, you have to be a dedicated poison deck that fights bog golem and is still in need of more shield. And that's very niche. That is an incredibly narrow road to walk. I think Hardened Toxins is a card that is simultaneously has a very, very high potential and a number of use cases where you actually want it that is astonishingly close to zero. Give me a second. All right. So, as I was saying about stuff, so Hardened Toxins is bad. That's the point. It is a bad card that is cleverly disguised to look like a card that could be good. So Spectral Infection. This one's a bit more complicated. So trigger poison 3 times on any enemy, then give it curse 1 for every rank of poison it has for 4 mana. The upgrade is 3 mana, trigger poison 2 times on any enemy, and then give it curse 1 for each rank of poison it has. So the reason that triggering only twice instead of 3 times is relevant is because, of course, if you trigger poison 3 times, then if the enemy had 8 poison beforehand, they will go from 8 to 4 to 2. So that they'll have 8, trigger once, go to 4, trigger a second time, go to 2, trigger a third time, go to 1. And so if you use Spectral Infection on an enemy that has 8 poison, they will only get curse 1. So if you're at 10, you get a similar thing. You'll go from 10 to 5 to 2 to 1. And so if you're only triggering twice, then so you just go from 8 to 4 and then from 4 to 2, and you're good. But Spectral Infection is another fairly narrow card because you need to be a poison deck that is building enough poison to trigger it, to make it useful. And you also have to be a poison deck that doesn't want to be trying to do other things with that. Because if you spend all of your poison on Spectral Infection now, then it's gone and you can't use it. You can't use that expensive poison that you spent all the time building on like your Poison to Touch or your Catalyst to build those stacks. Which is a little bit awkward. And the other awkward thing is, once again, like with Ardent Toxin, the amount of poison you need for Spectral Infection to be worthwhile is incredibly high. I mentioned that you need 8 poison. 8 poison is the minimum you need to get 1 curse, I believe, because you have 7, then you'll go to 3, and from 3 you will go to 1, and then from 1 you'll go to 0, which means that Spectral Infection against an enemy with 7 poison will do 11 damage, but it will not apply any curse. And I think that if you are playing Spectral Infection purely to get poison damage, it's not going to be a great deal, because you functionally already paid for the poison damage. Now you're paying 4 mana for additional on top of that. And you need to get to, I believe that it is for every multiple of 8 rounded down that you have, you get 1 curse. So 8 poison is 1 curse, 16 poison is 2 curse, 24 poison is 3 curse, and so on. And there are a very small number of fights where Spectral Infection is going to be giving you more than like 3 to 4 curse. And it has the problem that other poison payoffs like Catalyst and Poison to Touch have, where if you draw it in your opening hand before you've drawn your poison, and you don't draw any other poison to go with it, it does nothing. It's just a brick. And it doesn't help you. And unlike those two, though, it doesn't do anything to help you build poison. It only helps you consume poison, which means that you can't really chain it. You can't use it with Duplicitome or Spyglass. You can't use it with Regrowth usefully. And it's just kind of an awkward card to play. So it is, if you can get the upgrade, it can potentially add a lot of curse. but it again has that problem where you are a poison deck that was able to beat Bog Golem that somehow still needs this effect, and that's a very narrow range of decks. I think the only time I would consider Spectral Infection is I'm playing a poison deck and I'm in area 3 and I just have not been offered any catalysts or any poisons touches, and I just need something big, especially if it's pre-mid boss and I can get a guaranteed upgrade on it. I would consider it. But in general, if both of these cards you just completely ignore if you're not playing the poison deck. And even if you are playing the poison deck, you need to have a long, hard think about whether they are what you actually want. And Bog Golems are a monster you want to be avoiding because they're dangerous. They're normal enemies, so they won't have any special. They won't have the special rewards that elites will have, and they don't drop cards worth anything, which is especially notable because in Area 3 a lot of enemies do. Bog Golems are bad. Avoid them. They do too much damage and they don't pay out well. They're just there to make your day worse. Do not fight Bog Golems. Do not take their cards. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. But enough about the Bog Golem. Shadowbone Shell. Shadowbone Shells are jerks, but they have the decency to drop reasonable cards. So the first of them we'll talk about is Pilfering Shell. Pilfering Shell is easily the worst of the two cards. You gain 15 shield. You remove 8 shield from any enemy. If you do, draw 2. This card, 15 shield for 3 mana, is a reasonable amount. And so there will be times you will take this without any way to really plan to take advantage of the card draw section of this, and you'll be fine. But really, if a lot of the time you will be taking this card, it is because you have some way to give shield to your enemies yourself. There are some enemies in Area 3 where the ability to remove shield is relevant. Removing its shield isn't that relevant, but drawing 2 absolutely is. If you're fighting, if you have more shells coming up, if you have Death Strider coming up, if you are fighting Shadow and Protector later on, all of those are reasonable reasons to pick it up. And like I said, 15 shield is enough that you're not sad to have it if it's not relevant, if the shield removal isn't relevant. Bog Golems, which you should be avoiding, but if you can't, Pilfering Shell will work against them. But the other case is that if you're running Sanctuary, which you probably have it in your card pool because, as we discussed in the last video, Sanctuary is a ridiculously useful and versatile card that every deck wants, except for like very, 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 very aggressive decks that wouldn't want this shield card anyway. You can play Sanctuary and give enemies shield and use Pilfering Shield to take that shield away and draw cards. And that's some value. You love to see it. So if you have a Sanctuary, Pilfering Shield becomes a lot more useful, especially if you're not an aggressive deck that will be immediately chewing through all the shield you gave them. If you have Overflowing Barrier, that's another card that will work well with Pilfering Shell. So yeah, if you're a defensive card, if you're a defensive deck that is using cards like Sanctuary or Overflowing Barrier, Pilfering Shell is pretty great. And if you're not, it's still fine. Although speaking of ways to give shield, you may have already fought earlier in the area another Shadowbone Shell and gotten an Ossifying Strike. So Ossifying Strike is 2 mana for a strike that deals 4x5 damage to the first enemy, and you give that enemy 20 shield, and you get powerful 1. So Ossifying Strike is, on the surface, it is doing 20 damage and then giving 20 shield, which breaks even and accomplishes nothing. So on the surface, it is 2 mana, gain powerful 1 on a card that doesn't remove itself from your deck. And you know what? That's fine. That's a card you're fine having. 2 mana, gain powerful 1, entirely reasonable in a lot of decks. But if you have anything to break the symmetry, if you have anything that cares about multi-hits, if you have any other powerful generation, if you have any runes, if you just have equipment that's like plus strike damage, if you have critical hits, Ossifying Strike can do a devastating amount of damage. Ossifying Strike Plus being 5x6 damage and 30 shield also makes it spectacular. So it's a very good upgrade. It still is only powerful 1 when upgraded, but that's fine because it is a lot of damage and a lot of hits for a very, very, very good price of 2 mana. Ossifying Strike is a card that I think I am overrating a little bit in some of my decks, but I'm usually going to take it. If I am at all a deck that cares about playing strikes, I'm taking it. And even if it gives shield, like I said, it's going to be doing enough damage to make up for that. It's going to make all your subsequent attacks better. It's just very, very, very good. I would absolutely take Ossifying Strike in the majority of decks, and I would be very, very happy to do so. So Shadowbone Shell. So to recap, Bog Golems, avoid. Shadowbone Shell, dangerous, worth it. Fight if you can take it on. You'll get cards that will help, potentially. Shadowflame Scout. This is the last of the new enemies. This one is an elite, so it gets silver cards. Despite being an elite, it is not actually that dangerous. They do show up in multiples. I believe the mid-boss variant is one Scout and one Shadowbone Scout, which are the small ones, the Blackbirds that we had before. And then post-mid-boss is the Shadowflame Scout. Pre-mid-boss is one of the Blackbirds and two of the Firebirds. And then post-mid-boss, it's one Blackbird and three Firebirds, I believe. And they can also show up with one of these and one of the Shadowbone Elementals. So, in either case, they are not harmless, but they are certainly not as immediately devastating as a Balate or Hatchling will be, and they don't present the same long-term threat that a Shadowbone Elemental would, and they also don't hit as hard like a Death Strider would. In general, Shadowflame Scouts, the big annoyance is that they have a lot of evasion on them, but you can probably deal with that at the point that you've gotten to Area 3. So fighting them, not a bad deal. Not really going to be a problem. It'll work out for you. I think that they're much easier to deal with than Bog Golems. And I would say they are slightly easier to deal with than... No, they're actually, I would say, a decent amount easier to deal with than Shadowbone Shells. So, regardless of your deck, you should be able to deal with them. So, what cards do they draw? Well, the first one is a mana card, Shadowflame Focus, which is gain 3 mana, gain hidden if an enemy is burning, and evasion 1 this turn if an enemy is cursed. So, applying burn tends to be the trickier of these two conditions to meet. The nice thing about curse is that, of course, curse will not go away after you've applied it. And there are a lot of Area 3 monster cards that give some amount of curse. So it's not too difficult to find yourself just having some curse from something. And so this is then gain 3 mana, gain evasion 1 this turn, which makes it better mana dance in that scenario. It's just like mana dance, but you get 1 more mana, and the upgraded version is 4 mana and evasion 2 this turn if an enemy is cursed, which makes it super mana dance, because mana dance plus is only 2 mana and evasion 2 this turn. But if you don't have any ways to apply a curse, the fail case on this card is that it's gain 3 mana with no conditions. That seems fine. It's not exciting, but it's not bad. And if you're ever getting hidden or evasion out of this card, it becomes great. So that's basically how I would look at it. If you need a mana card, this is a mana card, you take it. If you have any ways to apply burning or curse, this goes up from being just a mana card to being a great mana card, and you're absolutely looking to take it. Especially if you have ways to make enemies burn and you're not playing parties, so like getting into hidden is particularly valuable to you, because this will be your only way to do it. And if you can get both, if you can apply burn and make an enemy be cursed, now you're getting lots of value. So yeah, that's the card you're fighting Shadowflame Scouts for, even if you're not a burn deck. And the nice thing is, because you only need 1 burn stack, if you just happen to have the item that is the flaming sword that's, whenever all of your strikes apply burn 1, cool, that'll work. You just have a burning focus, sure, that'll work. You don't need to be all in on burn for Shadowflame Focus to do enough work to justify itself. Ardent Blast, on the other hand, you do need to be pretty deep on burn. You it is 6 mana for a spell. You deal 16 damage to any enemy, and you draw 1 for every rank of burn on it. So 6 mana for 16 damage is a very bad rate, especially for an elite card in Area 3. So you are only taking this if you're drawing cards. And I think more than that, you're only taking this if you are drawing multiple cards from it. So whereas Shadowflame Focus, because the base case of gain 3 mana is pretty good, you will take Shadowflame Focus on Speculation, even if you don't have any curse and your only burn source is like a sometimes you don't have any burn at all, and even if your only burn source is a burning focus or something else like that, where you just like are getting out a couple burn, or like Catan, level 7 is going to get you your burn. Ardent Blast, I think you need to be drawing at least 3 cards before you want it, and ideally more than that. If you are the burn deck, Ardent Blast is obviously fantastic because paying 6 mana to draw functionally your whole hand of cards is very, very good. But the flip side of that being that this is very much a binary. Like I talked about Glacial Touch in the last video, where it's like, are you the Frostbite deck? Yes, Glacial Touch. No, then no, you don't run Glacial Touch. Ardent Blast is the same way. Are you the burn deck? Yes, then take Ardent Blast. No, then don't take Ardent Blast. It's pretty much that simple. And so that is all of, and I believe, let me check. Yep, that is all of the new monster cards in the new patch. I hope that at least one person watched this. Maybe that one person will subscribe if they aren't already subscribed. And I will see you guys for whatever the next video I end up recording is, whether that's a run or another guide. I still have a lot of other content I want to make around this new patch. I still want to make a video on the stuff that's changed. I want to make at least a couple Paladin guides. I still want to work on, at some point, a series of guides for all of the characters as sort of introductions for new players. But this is it for now, as you can tell because you're staring at a black screen. See you guys next time. Toodles.